Welcome to Women of Color in Conversation, Bias, Leadership, and Inclusive Workplace Culture, a presentation in the 2020 Professional Development Series hosted on SSP's On-Demand Library. My name is Megan McCarty, and I'm a client manager and systems support expert at J&J Editorial, as well as a member of SSP's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I'm delighted to have such an excellent group of speakers today, all of whom are researchers who serve student and researcher communities in a variety of capacities. First, let me welcome Dr. Barbara Krauthammer, Dean of the College of Humanities and Fine Arts at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and leading historian of African American slavery and emancipation in the United States. Welcome, Barbara. And also joining us is Dr. Rochelle Williams, Senior Director of Programs at the National Society of Black Engineers. She has over 11 years of professional experience in the nonprofit sector and higher education, and she is a staunch advocate for equity and systemic change within STEM. Welcome, Rochelle. Finally, we're grateful to have Charlotte Rowe, Scholarly Communications Librarian at the University of San Francisco. Charlotte works at the intersection of scholarly communications and social justice, and is published on diversity and representation in scholarly publishing. Thanks so much for joining us, Charlotte. So I can't thank you all enough for making time to participate in this discussion today. I know we're all just so overextended and overwhelmed with everything going on in the pandemic right now. So our principal goals today will be to, one, increase the audience's awareness and understanding of the challenges women of color face in the workplace, and two, hopefully help audience members make connections between the lived experiences of the speakers and what individuals and organizations can do to foster an inclusive workplace culture. Just to make clear from the outset, in no way is this session geared towards giving advice to women of color on how to succeed in hostile workplace environments. No member of any marginalized group needs to change their behavior in any way. You know, we are here today, though, to talk about disrupting the status quo, meaning how institutional and systemic change can be enacted and supported over the long term. So, and one more thing I wanted to say before we get started, I want to speak directly to the white folks in the audience and ask them to think critically about the role we play in creating and sustaining spaces made up almost exclusively of other white people. How those predominantly white spaces, may benefit you and at whose cost. And maybe, to look at it another way, I hope white folks can self-reflect on what they're doing to earn and by extension deserve the talents and perspectives that women of color bring to the table. So with that, I'd love to pass things over to the speakers today. It'd be great if we could kind of go around our virtual table. And if everyone could share a bit about your journey, your role and responsibilities in your current organization, and maybe also close with a challenge or a question you'd like everyone to keep in mind throughout our conversation. So Barbara, maybe you can kick things off for us.
Sure, thank you. Well, first, thanks for inviting me to participate. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So I started my career as a history professor working in the field of African American history. I did not imagine 20 years ago that I would wind up as the dean of a college. I thought I would be left alone to sit in the library and talk to people like Charlotte about where I could find my sources and do my research. But I had a great mentor and advisor in graduate school who always pushed us to question the language that we were encountering in scholarship. For example, if a sentence said, women in the United States did X, she would say, which women? Under what conditions? And so I think early on in my training as a scholar, as a researcher, as a teacher, it was really clear to me the importance of asking those questions about what assumptions are built into the language, what assumptions are built into institutions. And so as I moved through my faculty career, I realized that there were things that I saw happening in the department in terms of faculty hiring, admissions, nominating students and faculty for awards that I was really troubled by. And early on, I thought, well, instead of just complaining, let me figure out what I can do to make some change. And so that meant stepping into various leadership positions. So in some ways, I think I was sort of destined to be on this path, even though I didn't realize it early on. So I spent 3 years as dean of the graduate school and really worked to address issues of equity in STEM admissions in particular, which I think Rochelle can speak to, and am now dean of the College of Humanities and Fine Arts at this really critical juncture for higher education and for society. And so I think the question that I would pose to everybody is, what are the questions that you can ask that will shine a light on the places where change is really needed to pursue equity, and what are the relationships you can build to pursue those changes?
Thank you so much. Rochelle?
Hi, everyone. So again, thank you for having me. My journey has really been one centered on my personal mission, which is to advance society, and that's by one Black engineer at a time. So I've weaved in and out of higher education and nonprofit associations that truly align with my personal mission and vision for being on this earth. So early on in my career, especially like while I was a doctoral student, like everyone else, assistantship, all that other good stuff, but I was also able to be a science lab manager at the local community college. So that just introduced me to this world of the importance of two-year institutions and the role they play in STEM education. After completing my PhD, I went on to work for ABET, which is the accrediting body for engineering and technology programs, both in the US and abroad. And there I was the director of research and programs, and I just learned more about the accreditation system and the importance of assessment and evaluation, and how we have to start to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to how we think about the accreditation of our engineering and science programs. And so I think my time there is just when I start to see some systemic issues and how it can't be just checking off a box on a lot of things. And I think what really defined my role in being an advocate for equity in STEM is my time as a Christine Rezaian Policy Fellow at the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And in that role, I was actually able to help with the starting process of the report they released a few years ago on the sexual harassment of women in higher education. And I think it was just like being in the room with so many brilliant women in science, engineering, and medicine, and they're talking about policy. They're talking about systemic issues and not talking about, well, how do you fix the women? How do you make the women change themselves to not get harassed? Like it just did a completely 180 on how I approach this subject. And so my question to the audience is, how do you put our protests into your policy? How do you think about what we're out here fighting for? And how do you truly put that in your policies for systemic change?
That's fantastic. Thank you. Charlotte?
Hi, everybody. My name is Charlotte, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And my journey in diversity and anti-racism work came really late. I worked in publishing straight out of undergraduate, not realizing that scholarly publishing was sort of a prestige creative field, right? So it wasn't until I changed careers into librarianship that I realized that a lot of the things that I experienced in publishing were actually quite typical for a white-dominated industry. So I think since those realizations, I've done my best to try to address some of those issues and create education around the bias and diversity in publishing in concrete ways that can be undeniable. Change is coming slowly, and I think a lot of that is due to the Trump effect, right? People are realizing that racism really does impact things in this country. And of course, other kinds of bias as well. But I think the one question that I'd like everyone to sit with in the audience is understanding that this audience is going to be mostly scholarly publishing, and that scholarly publishing is predominantly white. But people to sit with the realization that they are in actually an industry that is hostile to people of color.
So I think it's unquestionable that everyone has dealt with bias in various ways, shapes, and forms throughout your career. I think you all have already touched on this a little bit. And those experiences of bias in turn have influenced not only your career path, but the kind of leaders that you've become over time in your organization, as well as within your field, Charlotte, I think. So I wonder if someone would like to jump in here to kind of get the conversation started about the interplay between bias and leadership. And yeah, whoever would like to jump in first, go ahead.
I'll start us off. So yes, bias and leadership, hand in hand, I'll speak from where I am now, which is as a leader, I am much more conscious about checking my own power and privilege, because I don't think a lot of the leaders that I encountered early on in my career necessarily embody that personal knowledge. And were open to receiving feedback when bias was at play. And so one thing I do make an effort to do with my team is, before I make a comment, oops, Rochelle, are you speaking as someone who has a doctoral degree, who went to an amazing college, like what privilege am I putting into this conversation where I'm not understanding what my team members are saying? And then also highlighting when certain things happen to me, not as just as a woman, but maybe as a Black woman, as a leader, and trying to use those experiences to help them grow. So for example, I had one team member have an issue with one of our sponsors. And my team knows, like, I expect you to be full expert on whatever you are here to do. Call me if you need me. And it got to the point where she had to call me. And the things that she was telling me she was encountering with this external client, when I got on the call, like, we didn't have any issues. He was just like, oh, I must have misunderstood. And so we debriefed after the call. The first thing she said was, I don't understand why it had to take me putting you on the phone to get this person to understand where I was coming from. And so while I hate that a lot of us have to have gone through a lot of these demeaning and aggressive experiences, I've been trying to make sure I channel those to help teach the women that are coming behind me, so that they are also able to call out when they see bias or microaggressions in the workplace.
I think that's a really important point, Rochelle, of being able to call out those episodes of bias and microaggression, and to know that there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing it. I think one of the things that saddens me the most in 2020 as dean of the college is that I hear from graduate students, undergraduate students, new PhD junior professors have the same experiences that I had now many decades ago in college, right? 30 years ago in college, 20 years ago in graduate school. And and still having to teach that same lesson of ask the question, right? Who are you talking about? And as you said, I also really liked your point of also having that sort of self-awareness that as a leader, we're in positions of power, right? But that power is also shifting depending on the context that we're in. And really being mindful of the context and the different kinds of power that we do or don't have in some cases in our leadership roles, and the ways that we really need to call attention to the way bias, can creep up, in virtually every setting. And really, I think just keep shining the light on it.
I think that SSP in the Scholarly Kitchen blog did a couple anonymous posts of people who had had racist experiences in their scholarly publishing roles. And it took me several weeks to read that. It was really triggering for me. And I think those experiences are not unique, right? Instances of microaggressions and just flat out racism. And also those experiences do lead to the leaving of people from the publishing industry, right? I had an experience in one of the companies I worked for where slowly every person of color left. And they left for what were legitimate and sometimes personal and sometimes professional reasons, but they one by one left until I was the only one left. And then I left too. And in the meantime, I saw my white colleague get promoted, right? So definitely it's something that exists both in my personal life and also that I've seen professionally play out. And really anybody who's read those Scholarly Kitchen blog posts can see that they are difficult, devastating, and daily, right, to deal with. That's
I think you make, I think you make a great point of talking about the personal and the professional are interweaved, right? I think that there is no like separation. That's not possible.
Yeah, when I talk to when I mentor people about their career choices, I say, look, you spend more hours awake at work than anywhere else. So if you're somewhere that's not good for you, then you do need to make moves to leave. Yeah.
And so Charlotte, I know you've also written about librarians as, agents of social change. And I wonder if you could kind of expand on that and talk about the role of librarians and libraries as publishers playing in promoting equity in scholarly communications.
Mm-hmm. I do know that more recently, scholarly publishing as a field has made efforts to increase diversity, the C4 DISC efforts, and each of the different organizations have their own fellowships and scholarships. I would say librarianship has had a diversity fellowships and scholarships and all those things for a lot longer. So when I came into librarianship, I was really fortunate to be in a place where I could speak to these issues and be heard. One of the great things that I've been involved in the past is the Library Publishing Coalition's publishing ethics framework, which I think addresses not just issues around peer review and plagiarism, which is usually what we talk about when we talk about publishing, but also access and diversity and accessibility in terms of those who aren't able-bodied, not just in terms of open access, which is what we usually talk about in scholarly communications, who has power, privacy, which is increasingly also an issue because so much of our things are digitized and through digital tools. Yeah, so I'm really fortunate to be in a space where those issues are taken seriously in librarianship and library publishing. And I know that SSP and the Library Publishing Coalition has done some work together. And I really hope that the library publishing ethics framework gains more of a foothold in the publishing community in general.
Barbara, I wonder in your work as dean if these issues of equity and accessibility, inclusion in publishing have come up. Obviously, because publishing is the bread and butter of what researchers do.
Right, absolutely. And I think it comes up for people of color from, before you can even get into graduate school and think about scholarly publishing, right, in terms of what's considered a legitimate topic of research, right? What are considered legitimate archival sources? I mean, I remember really painful conversations with faculty members saying like, well, and quite frankly, you know, not all that long ago with faculty saying, well, you can't write histories of enslaved women because they didn't write their own sources, right? So there's no history there. And I think about that now as dean of a college, right? So I thought about it as an advisor to undergraduates and graduate students saying, no, you can write a history of Black women domestic servants, right? You just have to be thoughtful and creative about what kinds of material you look at, right? But now thinking about junior faculty careers rising up through the ranks in my college, you know, and again, really having to think carefully about the kinds of mentoring that we give graduate students and young faculty about where to publish, when to publish, who to reach out to for feedback. And I feel like I could say, I guarantee you, you could talk to any Black woman in the academy, any woman of color in the academy, who will have a story of having an article rejected, you know, and getting a reader's report that says this isn't a significant enough topic, right? And the topic will be slavery in the United States, you know, writ large, but it's not significant for a journal. And so I think, again, real sort of intentional mentoring of junior faculty. And gosh, and I think looking to people like Charlotte really for information and leadership and truthfully just inspiration that we're not crazy. The data really show the kinds of racism and exclusionary practices that happen that you wouldn't know necessarily as a young scholar trying to publish.
I wonder if this would be a good time to switch to some of the graphs that Charlotte brought to the conversation. Thank you. Maybe Charlotte, you can talk us through some of this. Let's see.
Yeah, sure. I do some work educating particularly early faculty and graduate students around publishing, and a lot of it is very, very basic. It's stuff everybody should know, but everybody knows that the peer review process works and how it works, but seeing it visualized in this slide has been something that people have usually not seen. So the journal, your fellow academics and you and the journal, this is how the peer reviews process goes. And everyone's like, oh, okay, that makes sense, right? And then I show them the next slide, which is the race and ethnicity of full-time faculty. And when I show this to them, I say, you know, as an editorial assistant, I was trained to look for tenured and tenure track faculty in order to find peer reviewers, because they were the ones who had authority, right? Which is problematic because so much of adjunct faculty these days, which is an increasingly larger pool of our professors, are women and people of color, right? So there's definitely that. So this is overwhelmingly white, race and ethnicity full-time faculty. And the following slide is also overwhelmingly white in mainstream publishing. This is Lee and Lowe's diversity baseline survey. And in scholarly publishing, the following slide after that, is the race and ethnicity of scholarly publishing, which is, again, overwhelmingly white, right? So I also add in, because I am a librarian, the race and ethnicity of academic librarianship and librarianship, again, overwhelmingly white. And the reason I add this is because libraries actually buy the books, right? So when publishers are saying there is no market for this, right? It means that the buyers are also, you know, well. So they have this like whole cycle, next slide, of, oh, sorry, you can go to the next one, actually. It's not that different. You can see the pattern. You have this whole cycle of the journal publishers being overwhelmingly white and peer reviewers being overwhelmingly white, and then the purchasers, the librarians themselves, being overwhelmingly white. So it is this yeah, self-perpetuating cycle where scholarship that isn't outside of what is deemed authoritative and valuable is denied. Yeah.
Rochelle, I'd love to bring you into this conversation and talk about how all these dynamics play out within STEM and kind of your experiences.
Yeah, so when Charlotte just mentioned about the librarians being the purchasers, I was like, that's diversity supply for us, right? The diversity of suppliers. And so how we've been trying to make sure that like these companies and organizations who hire entrepreneurs and those who own technical businesses, like they aren't taking diversity, equity, and inclusion into play when it comes to getting these consultants or contractors on their payroll. So we're starting to see this shift where a lot of organizations such as ASCE, NSBE, SHIP, we're trying to push this narrative like you have to be much more conscious of engineering supplier diversity. Like you can't just continue to hire the same contractors over and over. And so that means we're much more intentional. Any contracts or vendors that we hire as organizations ourselves, we're asking questions. How many women are in leadership positions in your organization? Because it's one thing to tell me how many women are in your organization, because you may be telling me women who serve as administrators or lower level staff. I want to know how many women are in leadership, how many people of color make decisions in your organization. And so for us, it's the same. Like we just have to be much more intentional about challenging these companies and making sure that they're taking us seriously when we talk about the breadth of equity and inclusion in engineering.
And is that's something that you include in contract negotiations, or I mean, I imagine it has to. You kind of have to hold vendors to this, right?
Yeah, it's like a part of the bidding process. So that's a part of it. Tell us how you are making substantial change when it comes to equity and inclusion within your own company before we attach our names to an organization who doesn't live by the values that we work by.
So Barbara, I'm just like processing in my mind, thinking about this, bringing it back to, we've kind of touched on, it's not just about the pipeline. It's not just about people coming into the field. It's not just about frameworks within. This is right, the scope of what we're talking about here. Okay, great. So I think the way we're approaching things, we're looking at many different aspects. It's not just a pipeline issue. It's not just the people who are in the library. It's not just the people with the publishers. It's and researchers themselves are going to have different needs based on the stage that they are in their career. So early career, mid career, so on and so forth. And obviously, like losing people of color along that, in those different stages is a really big concern. So I wonder if we could talk about that a little bit as well.
Sure. Well, and I think you hit right all of the critical points in higher education, right, from access to making your way through, right? And so it's not just pipeline, right, but it's about all of those, I don't know, what's the metaphor, speed bumps, potholes, ruts, ditches along the way. And then the attrition of people, I think, is also a concern in higher ed on all counts, right? On the teaching side, on the research side, on the publishing side. I think one of the places where I've seen it over the years really acutely is in STEM, actually, of people of color and women of color in particular, just feeling like being the only one in the lab, in the seminar room, in journal club, what have you, is just not worth it. And they leave to pursue usually careers in industry once they go from graduate education to industry, and I don't know, I mean, Rochelle can certainly speak to this, but I don't know that industry is that much better. But I think it feels different enough than some of the higher ed environments, which, all institutions are slow to change and resistant to change. And so one of the things that I think is most inspiring these days and challenging, even for all of us in leadership positions, is really this, what I think of as really a new student-led civil rights movement. Right? That Black Lives Matter is really driven in large part by young people who are students who really want to see systemic change in these old ivy-covered institutions, right? Whether they're corporate institutions or institutions of higher ed. And I think it's really powerful. And I think, we really have to listen seriously to what they're asking for in terms of decolonizing education. Right, and making the syllabus reflect a range of experiences of people of color, nationally, globally. And I think it's really a powerful call for change that we absolutely have to listen to and have to act on.
Rochelle, have the Black Lives Matter protests, sparked new conversations or brought new, a new tone or a new urgency to things going on at the NSBE, or does this kind of just amplify what you all have always been doing?
I think it continues to amplify what even the reason for the National Society of Black Engineers. It was founded by 6 Black engineers who saw that there needed to be change in higher education. So that's why they formed this group in the first place. And so now, we've always said we are building a core of engineers who are culturally responsible, right? So that fits straight into the matters of social justice. And saying that, it's great that we have this great technical education and expertise, but we know it's not enough to just do that for ourselves, but to build that up for Black people in general, to make this world a better place, period. I think what we are seeing now when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement, as it relates to the National Society of Black Engineers, is a lot of companies like reaching out to us like, oh, y'all are the best kept secret. That's what we've been doing this. We've been trying to get you all to see that the only way you're going to enact change is if you have more diverse and equitable workplaces. And so what we want to do is really shift the conversation from diversity and inclusion, checking off those boxes. Yes, you have this number of Black students interning or being hired at the end of the year, to challenging these companies to think about what systemic changes are they putting in place to make sure that these engineers stay there. So Barbara asked the question, like, we see, is it any better in industry? Our professionals are still struggling with trying to just stay engineers. Sometimes we have the mentality, I could just screw this. I'm not going to become a professor. I can just go make some great money and deal with this in industry. But what we see in industry is that they're leaving. They're not staying engineers. They change altogether. And so that's awful, right? And I think I want to go back to Barbara's point earlier about how, like, she's seeing the same thing she went through in grad school, and she's having to give these lessons to her students and faculty now. And I mean, I finished my PhD 10 years ago, and I kid you not, in the movie Hidden Figures, when Mary Jackson walked into her graduate course, in the way that everyone reacted to her, I started crying because I was like, that is exactly what happened to me in grad school. I walked into a graduate physics course, and the first thing out of a student's mouth was, you're in the wrong class. Like, the very first thing. And this was less than 15 years ago. And so I think when we ask, like, why do we do this? Why is Black Lives Matter so important? It's because no one should have to do this work because they have to, but because they want to. No one should have to leave their technical engineering workspace because now they have to go tackle issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I'm really hoping that what this movement does is takes that onus off of a lot of us who are in this space, not necessarily because we want to, but because we have to. Grateful for this journey, and I see this is why I'm here, but imagine how many people we're losing in the technical space, people who are able to be innovators and entrepreneurs because they have to focus on workplace issues.
Charlotte, I wonder if you want to add anything here before we move on. But I think these are all excellent topics, you know, and points that everyone has made.
Yeah, I just want to say that what Barbara and Rochelle are saying about the experiences of women of color and Black women in particular in fields that are not diverse, that also, like, even if you are an ally or consider yourself an ally, you can still not see that happening, right? So I would say if it's within your power and you see that happening, or open your eyes and see it happening, right? And interrupt it if you can. Yeah, because it continues to happen.
I wonder, Barbara, you brought up one of your mentors in the past. So I thought maybe we could move to mentorship and maybe touch on allyship a little bit more too, and maybe the role allies have played in your career, or maybe the absence of allies would be a more appropriate way to put it in some ways. But yeah, maybe you can speak a little bit to the types of other mentors you've had throughout your career, and maybe other ways you've served as a mentor, beyond what you've touched on earlier about students who may have had topics that were outside or outside of deemed legitimate historical topics.
Sure. Well, one of the things that I've learned, and I'm sure we've all had similar kinds of experiences, is that mentors sometimes come from the obvious places and sometimes come from the unexpected places. And so I think that one of the things that's been really important to me and a real catalyst for my journey into higher ed leadership is being open to mentors from unexpected places and realizing that you need to have a range of mentors who serve different functions, right? Some are really those people who are very close to you personally, who really lift you up and let you know that you are actually not the crazy person in the room, and who are really there for you. And then you sometimes have mentors who are at a distance, but who are the people who remember to nominate you for a prize, for a job. And I think in terms of serving as a mentor, again, I go back to something Rochelle said at the very start of being really mindful of who you are and what your role is, and so my role as a mentor really varies, again, depending on the context, depending on the needs of the individual, right? I have some graduate students that I can say to, young women of color that I can say to, I want a chapter from you by the end of the month. It's been too long. You need to write a chapter. And I have other students who aren't in a position to hear that from me and to hear that I'm saying it with full love and support and confidence in them, right? And I just have other students that I need to say it to differently. And I have colleagues that I need to reach out to differently. So I think good mentoring requires not just dedication, but a real kind of self-awareness and intentionality of what is the other person's needs, right? Because it's not about what the mentor gets out of it. I mean, there's some satisfaction, but it's really what does this person need to succeed in a way that is right for them? And I think, that's a tricky thing to do sometimes, but really valuable.
Michelle, I wonder if you could speak to this, being mentored, the types of mentors you've had, and maybe some, situations where you served as a mentor.
Barbara said it perfectly. Like, you just have to be open to who the universe brings you. If you had to do a photo lineup of my mentors, they all look so different. They all come from a different range of backgrounds. They're not just in STEM. And like she said, some are there to just really coach me day to day, like, girl, don't do that. Or make sure you do this in like XYZ days so you can get this other thing accomplished. Some of there are my I would say like my financial mentors. Like these are the moves you need to be making so that one day you can do this. You don't have to work here forever. I have mentors who are like presidents of a university who I don't have to talk to every day, but I know if I text or call, she's gonna pick up the phone, right? And she is gonna be that like sounding wisdom that I need to tackle whatever problem I've just encountered. And so just thinking about how they all came to be, it was out of nowhere, right? Just I'm at a conference, or I had a friend introduce me to a friend and they're like, oh, let me reach out. So just always be open to the world of mentorship. Never think that you're too big to have a mentor, and never think you're too big to be a mentor in service to others. And I think that's what I love most about my position at NSBE, is that I get to be a mentor to so many students in higher ed. And I don't think I could have had this range if I was strictly a professor. And I just love that I have this ability to really help craft the journey for a lot of students when it comes to engineering education.
Charlotte, I wonder if you'd like to share a little bit
Yeah,
about your mentorship journeys.
I've been really fortunate to have mentors who also looked very different and played very different roles. You know, some of them did like resume and cover letter review. Some of them said, oh, I don't need that keynote, but Charlotte could do it, right? So it is this mentoring is a commitment to someone's success, right? Is something that I like to say. And sometimes it's just a quick question, how are you, in the middle of a hallway or at a conference. And sometimes it's a long-term, very in-depth relationship. But I think that we should all just be committed to the success of each other. And it's sad as I listened to Barbara and Rochelle to realize that I had people in my life who were not committed to my success who should have been, right? So I guess that's my final word on this mentoring is that who in your life should you be a mentor to that you're not, right? Maybe someone who reports to you directly or not, right? So someone who works in your company. It is a commitment. It is a commitment, but we should be making commitments to each other, I think, in this society.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of am wondering now in the pandemic with everyone working from their home office, are there fewer opportunities? I mean, are we all too, overextended right now? I mean, what are you worried about, missing out on opportunities of running into people at conferences? I'm already thinking, I missed SSP in Boston this year, and I always look forward to seeing colleagues and catching up with people. I wonder how you're seeing this play out in the pandemic right now.
I think the word of the pandemic when it comes to this is intentionality. Being intentional about continuing to foster those relationships. And so I remember ASEE's meeting was a few weeks ago. And so I was like, oh, I would normally see X, Y, and Z this week. And so let me send them a text. Normally I see you this week, how are you doing? And then really asking, how are you doing? And it's just, you have to, like Charlotte said, be committed to people, not just to conferences and giving presentations, but committing to the people who really help you on your professional journey.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that because I think you're both are so right about the importance of committing to people and making that relationship in whatever form it looks like a priority, right? If it's a once a month priority or a once a week priority or a once a day priority. And it's funny because someone just reached out to me in the wake of a conference that didn't happen. And there was a little bit of a dust up about who was included in the online conference and who wasn't. And someone reached out to me and said, you know, I know what happened to you and your panel, and I'm really sorry, and it shouldn't have happened. And I'm going to sign on to this letter of protest to the organizer. And, you know, and that was all. It was a short note, but it really made a difference, because I thought, oh, right, here we are 25 years out of graduate school, and someone's still thinking about my well-being and how my well-being affects the well-being of the graduate students who would have been on that panel with me. You know, and seeing those connections, it really meant a lot to me to know that someone else was thinking about that. And so again, I think, you know, Charlotte and Rochelle, you got it absolutely right, of being intentional and committed.
I will also add, in this pandemic era, that I've been overly active on social media, maybe finding people to engage with and engaging with people that I already know. And it's a reminder that going to conferences, being able to go to conferences, is something that not everyone has the privilege to be able to do. For example, the first SSP that I went to, I only encountered one other woman of color there. So definitely outside of your normal sort of conference experience, your normal roles and hallways of privilege that you might walk in, this is an opportunity to just sort of step outside of that. And by you or meeting personally.
No, thank you so much for mentioning that. I think that's just a really important point to make about access. And you know the internet can also do so many amazing things. Twitter can be an amazing venue for connecting people. Yeah, thank you for making that point. So I'm thinking maybe, unless we want to talk on allies or how allies have played a role in your journey, maybe we can shift to back to talking about, inclusive workplace culture and systemic change to kind of round out our conversation here. Okay, great. So Rochelle, a question I wanted to pose to you, given all of your experience, you've already touched on a couple ways in that your organization holds vendors accountable, right? But I wonder, what are other ways that you think help create environments of continuous change and long-term, continuous improvement and long-term change? What's the key to making that happen within an organization, right? Where many different people have different priorities. You're negotiating a lot of different things all at once.
Yeah, so all I say, it starts with the leadership. People are not going to buy in to this idea of diversity, inclusion, and equity if they don't see it modeled by the leadership. So just in general, what I've seen with a lot of different organizations and institutions of higher education is just this idea that people don't want to give up what they perceive as power, right? They don't want to give that up because they know if they do, that this privilege that they've enjoyed for so long can be taken away, right? Because now you're allowing everyone the same opportunity to succeed. And so what I think that, what I've been intentional about is making sure we get in front of who the leadership is and really understanding why is it that this organization is this way, and speaking to innovation and diversity and how, when we think about diversity, it's not about just checking off a box, but how do we bring these different experiences to the table so that you can grow your organization or your company or your engineering program. I think when we speak to equity, it helps these leaders see, okay, this is not about attacking me as a leader. It's about really helping the organization or the institution grow.
And Barbara, I wonder if you want to speak to this in the university setting. maybe some of the keys to, creating an environment, setting the stage for improvements and change.
So I think Rochelle is absolutely 1,000,000% correct that it depends largely on the leadership and really all the way up to the top, right? For colleges and universities, the president, the chancellor, the board of trustees. And I think, it requires much more than that box checking of, oh, well, we hired, 1 Black woman and 2 Asian American men last year, so we're good on diversity, right? I mean, that is not diversity, that is not systemic change, that is not changing the culture. One of the things, that I've been thinking about a lot, and one of the questions that I started with today was thinking about what are the networks and collaborations that we can build as leaders to ensure that there is a concerted effort to make change, right? That it's not just what I do in my college, but it's what do I do in my college and how do I get the deans of the other colleges, who are not all women and not all women of color, to realize that the change I'm trying to make will benefit their colleges too within our university, and that if we partner, we have a better chance of succeeding in a broader context. So I think the collaboration is really important. And I think, again, just pushing the issue and asking the question. People who know me know that I hate more than anything the notion of difficult conversations, right? That phrasing, because I always say, like, difficult for whom? It is not difficult for my children when we talk about racism, right? Because they're the ones who come home to me and say, I think what the teacher just did was racist. What do you think, right? And they'll tell the story, right? And that's our daily conversation. That's not a difficult conversation. So part of it, I think, I see my role as a leader, as a woman of color in leadership, is to say, these are not difficult conversations for all of us. Right? For some of us, these are our daily conversations. And if we can't have these conversations at the table where everyone else is sitting, then we're not going to be able to address the underlying issues and make the change that we need to make.
Charlotte, I wonder if you want to jump in and kind of speak to, what you think about change within organizations. I mean, I think everyone has mentioned leadership is the, number one. Networks are very important. Yeah. It has to be meaningful, not just checking off a box.
I totally want to add to what Barbara and Rochelle have said about not just checking off the box. And I know that I love a checklist, right? Like, I love to check off the boxes. And the reason we sometimes look at a checklist like that is because it's easy, it's templated, you feel like you've addressed everything, right? But I want to acknowledge that the template for quote unquote diversity is not adequate, right? These solutions are not one size fits all, even if the problems seem systemic and are systemic and seem duplicated because we're dealing with people. And one thing I want to challenge leaders to do is to just change the way you do things. Change it, right? If you have a conference and you have to eliminate some panels, why don't you eliminate the famous keynotes and have a conference of all graduate students? That would be revolutionary, and it would give space and voice to people who deserve to be heard and need to be heard and are on the cutting edge, right? So yeah, I would say just go ahead and do things differently.
I just want to jump in, and I think we have to find ways to shake the status quo and like shake ourselves out of these assumptions that we hold on to of the way things have always been done. And leaders need to come to the table with that mindset, I think. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that, I mean, it's like for decades, it's been, we've known that access to conferences is a problem for women of color, people of color from marginalized groups. Has it really changed? I don't think even just like one little piece of the puzzle, right? Access to conferences. So, yeah. So maybe we can close. Maybe we can talk about. Obviously I don't want you to come up with a checklist, but maybe some things we can leave the audience with thinking about. You know, what are the things that would make the biggest impacts for researchers and students who are people of color? Yeah. What are the ways that could really impact their lives and improve them?
You know, I will leave the audience with homework, and I think the dean can appreciate me doing this. It's really, I have a group of friends in higher education who just started this grassroots initiative called Black in Engineering. You can go to their website, blackinengineering.org. They just listed out recommendations on becoming an anti-racist university. And these recommendations apply to faculty and staff, graduate students, undergraduates. And it is so comprehensive that we are now planning a session with deans to start to think about, okay, you have this list of recommendations. How do we turn those recommendations into action? And if we can't, what are the systemic barriers in place that prevent us from moving change on this particular recommendation? And so I think it's a great starting point if people have questions about, well, what can we do? What does this look like? I would reference that list because it's not at all encompassing of everything we need to do, but it is a great start in thinking about how to be anti-racist. And I think one of my favorite pieces is their recommendation on historical education. We love numbers as engineers. We love facts, but I think it's so important to also understand history and how that plays in our ability to move forward as a nation. So that would be my recommendation for the audience.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that source. And you know, you also bring up a really important point about history. And you know, are we all operating under the same conception that we are all Americans with the same history? I think sometimes white folks look at history a different way than people of color do. Barbara, I wonder, you know, maybe you could, obviously you can speak to this, but maybe you can also leave us with some our audience with some takeaways as well.
Sure, history for sure, right? But I think even a history of people who have not been at the table, right? And there are plenty of scholars doing that work. So I think in terms of what we can do, I loved Charlotte's like just start making the change by doing things differently. So I do think some really sort of self-examination of what do we value and why, and are there other things that really meet our criteria for excellence or merit or whatever, you know, standard we want to say, that may not look the same or have followed the same journey, right? Is one way of doing it. I think I really genuinely believe in questioning the assumptions of, you know, what's merit, what's excellence, whether it's in admissions, whether it's looking at, you know, the peer review process and who's asked to review those articles, right? And, you know, I think Charlotte's statistics at the beginning were really jarring in ways that I suspect even the most well-intentioned white peer reviewers and editors are not mindful of. And so I think if everyone asked those questions, would be just a tremendous start to conversation that could lead to real change, I think. It's hard work, you know, but it's critical. And I think the last thing that I would say is an understanding, and history plays the role here too, in what we might think of as the social geography of race and of privilege, right? Things are very different in Massachusetts than if I were in Mississippi or California in terms of access and diversity and inclusion and the politics of race and privilege. And I think, you know, white people need to be mindful of that, and people of color know it very well, but that has to be part of the conversation too.
Charlotte, please go ahead.
I think in this country we're aware, as people who are working in a higher education environment, that the education that we were taught in school was inaccurate. For example, I'm learning all the time, and I just recently found out all the stuff that Christopher Columbus did. Just horrible. So personally, doing your best to learn and do all the things that you can to catch up, because we're all behind, all of us, right? Me included, so behind. And then also supporting, hiring, promoting Black women, people of color, including the two fabulous people who are on this panel with me. I'm going to go read their work, because that's what I should do as a supporter, right? I should go and request that my library purchase their books, right? And if they recommend grad students or faculty or anyone else to me, then I should go support them as well. So be an active participant instead of sort of just a passive acceptor of the status quo. And that includes really concrete things like looking at how much the people of color are paid in your organizations and making sure that they're paid equally. I will say, as sort of a shocking another statistic, the UK salary surveys, because you have to report your salaries if you have over 100 employees, revealed that in publishing, which is a predominantly white female industry, women had the same, if not greater, lack of salary parity. So all that injustice still exists, even in places that are supposed to be enlightened or female dominated. Yeah, take active steps to fix it.
Thank you so much. I think our audience will take a lot away from that. Being an active participant in your own life and in your own organization. Build those networks, actively support them, ask questions, question the assumption of why things are happening the way they're happening. And, you know, don't be afraid to speak up. Don't just kind of be complicit or kind of, you know, just allow things to sit back and allow things to happen. I think that's just all excellent advice. So thank you so much for joining us today. I think we're at the hour. Yeah, I've really appreciated this engaging conversation, and also thank you to SSP for giving us this opportunity to be a part of the on-demand library. I'll be available, of course, for the live broadcast when the audience will be asking, you know, live Q&A. So yeah, I look forward to that with everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.